August 1894 brought little fanfare to the small town of Owen Sound, Ontario, where William Avery Bishop entered a world that expected nothing extraordinary from him. The fourth child of William Avery Bishop Sr., a registry clerk, and Margaret Louisa Bishop, young Billy grew up amid the rolling farmlands and quiet streets of rural Canada, where ambition seemed as distant as the wars being fought across distant oceans. His childhood companions were horses, not machines, and his playground was the muddy fields surrounding his modest home rather than the clouds that would later become his battlefield. The boy showed little promise in his early years. Restless, undisciplined, and prone to daydreaming, Billy Bishop frustrated teachers at Owen Sound Collegiate Institute who saw in him only wasted potential. His academic performance hovered between mediocre and concerning, while his behavior earned him repeated reprimands. The young bishop preferred hunting rabbits with his rifle in the woods behind his home to conjugating Latin verbs or solving mathematical equations. His marksmanship, however, was exceptional, a talent that would later rewrite the history of aerial warfare. In 1911, Billy's family made a decision that would alter the trajectory of his life. Despite his lackluster academic record, they enrolled him at the Royal Military College of Canada in Kingston, Ontario. The institution, established in 1876 to train officers for Canadian military service, maintained strict standards of conduct and academic excellence. Bishop arrived at the stone fortress overlooking Lake Ontario as an ungainly 17-year-old, his uniform ill-fitting, his posture slouched, and his attitude decidedly unmilitary. The upper-class cadets from Montreal, Toronto, and Ottawa took one look at the farm boy from Owen Sound and dismissed him entirely. The hazing began immediately. Senior cadets subjected Bishop to the brutal traditions that define military college life: forced midnight exercises, public humiliation during inspections, and endless mockery of his rural background. They called him the farmer, the hayseed, and worse. During drill formations, his awkward gait drew laughter. In the classroom, his struggles with advanced mathematics and engineering principles confirmed their assessment. Billy Bishop did not belong among Canada's future military elite. Even his instructors expressed doubt about his capacity to graduate, let alone serve with distinction. Yet beneath the ridicule and failure, something burned in Bishop that his tormentors could not see. He possessed an almost reckless courage, a refusal to accept defeat that bordered on stubbornness. When he nearly failed out during his second year, he doubled his efforts not in academics, those remained beyond his grasp, but in physical training and marksmanship. He spent hours at the rifle range, honing the skills learned hunting in the Ontario wilderness. His eye for distance, his steady hand, his ability to calculate trajectory instinctively rather than mathematically, these gifts went unnoticed by those who measured worth in examination scores. In 1914, as Bishop struggled through his final year at Royal Military College, the world erupted into chaos. On June 28, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria fell to an assassin's bullet in Sarajevo, triggering a cascade of declarations that would consume Europe in fire. By August 4th, Britain had entered the Great War, and with it, all dominions of the British Empire, including Canada. The news reached Kingston like a thunderclap, transforming the theoretical studies of warfare into urgent preparation for real combat. Bishop graduated in 1914 near the bottom of his class, his academic record a testament to years of struggle. Yet he wore the uniform now, held a commission in the Mississauga Horse Cavalry Regiment, and carried within him an unshakable determination to prove wrong every person who had mocked a Canadian farm boy. As he departed Kingston's limestone walls for the last time, he could not have imagined that within 3 years, his name would be spoken with reverence across the Allied nations, or that history would remember him as one of the most lethal fighter pilots ever to take to the skies. January 1915 found Second Lieutenant William Bishop aboard a transport ship cutting through the gray Atlantic waters toward England. Surrounded by thousands of Canadian volunteers eager to reach the Western Front, the journey was miserable packed conditions. Constant seasickness and the lurking fear of German U-boats turned each day into an endurance test. Bishop spent much of the crossing in his bunk, fighting nausea and contemplating what awaited him in France. The cavalry officer who departed Halifax Harbor bore little resemblance to the confident ace he would become. Instead, he was simply another young man sailing toward unimaginable horror. Upon arriving in England, Bishop's cavalry unit faced an uncomfortable reality. The age of mounted warfare had ended before it truly began. The Western Front, stretching from the English Channel to the Swiss border, had devolved into a nightmare of trenches, barbed wire, and machine guns that reduced cavalry charges to suicide missions. Horses, once the pride of military tradition, became targets and pack animals. Bishop found himself training for a war that no longer existed, practicing saber charges and mounted reconnaissance, while the actual conflict across the Channel consumed men by the tens of thousands in muddy stalemate. By June 1915, Bishop's unit deployed to France, where reality shattered any romantic notions of warfare he might have harbored. The trenches near St. Eloi presented a vision of hell, rats the size of cats feasting on corpses, the constant stench of death and latrine, the crack of sniper fire, and the soul-crushing artillery barrages that could entomb men alive in collapsing dugouts. According to documentation from the Canadian War Museum archives, Bishop described this period as the most wretched existence I could imagine, spending days knee-deep in freezing water while German shells screamed overhead. The cavalry officer found himself assigned to mundane duties carrying messages through communication trenches, observing enemy positions, and enduring the random violence that characterized trench warfare. Men died beside him for no tactical reason, victims of chance rather than combat. Bishop witnessed a fellow officer decapitated by shrapnel during breakfast, another buried alive when a shell collapsed his dugout, and countless soldiers succumbing to trench foot, pneumonia, and the simple grinding despair of life underground. This was not war as the Royal Military College had taught it. This was industrial slaughter. During one particularly miserable night in July 1915, Bishop stood in a waterlogged trench and looked up. Above the perpetual smoke and stink of the battlefield, he watched an aircraft, a British BE-2C reconnaissance plane, flying serenely over the German lines. The pilot sat in an open cockpit, master of his domain, while below him men drowned in mud and blood. In that moment, Bishop made a decision that would alter his destiny. He would leave the ground behind and fight in the air. Whatever it took, however difficult the training, he would escape the trenches and join the Royal Flying Corps. The path to aviation proved far more challenging than Bishop anticipated. His application to the Royal Flying Corps faced immediate obstacles. Flying was considered a gentleman's pursuit, reserved for upper-class officers with connections and breeding. Bishop had neither. His poor academic record from Royal Military College raised questions about his ability to master the technical aspects of aviation. Moreover, the RFC maintained rigorous standards, washing out more candidates than they accepted. Bishop's commanding officers in the cavalry expressed skepticism that the farm boy possessed the refined skills necessary for aerial combat. Yet Bishop persisted with characteristic stubbornness. He leveraged every connection available, wrote letter after letter to RFC headquarters, and volunteered for any duty that might bring him closer to aviation. His persistence finally yielded results in September 1915 when he received orders to report for observer training. The role of observer, sitting in the rear cockpit of two-seater aircraft, operating cameras and machine guns, while pilots flew, represented the bottom rung of aviation, but Bishop accepted eagerly. Anything was better than the trenches. The first time Bishop climbed into an aircraft, his life changed forever. The sensation of leaving Earth behind, of rising above the mud and horror, filled him with exhilaration unlike anything he had experienced. As the aircraft climbed through the clouds and the Western Front spread below like a terrible map, he understood that he had found his calling. The air was clean, the sky infinite, and the combat, when it came, would be individual rather than anonymous. Here, skill and courage mattered. Here, the farm boy from Owen Sound could prove his worth not through social connections or academic credentials, but through raw ability. November 1915 marked Bishop's arrival at the RFC training facility in Shoreham, England, where aspiring pilots and observers learned the deadly craft of aerial warfare. The training grounds near the Sussex coast presented a stark contrast to the Western Front green fields. Clear skies and the absence of artillery fire, yet danger lurked in every flight. Aircraft of the Great War era were fragile contraptions of wood, canvas, and wire, powered by unreliable engines and possessed of flight characteristics that killed the careless. Training accidents claim nearly as many lives as combat, with students regularly crashing during takeoffs, losing control in turns, or experiencing catastrophic mechanical failures. Bishop threw himself into observer training with obsessive focus. He learned to operate the Lewis machine gun mounted on a rotating ring in the rear cockpit, mastering the art of firing while the aircraft pitched and rolled through violent maneuvers. He studied aerial photography, memorizing the telltale patterns of enemy trenches, artillery positions, and supply dumps visible from altitude. Most importantly, he absorbed the emerging doctrine of air combat, learning that altitude meant survival, that the sun could hide an attacker, and that aerial warfare rewarded aggression over caution. During his first operational missions as an observer in early 1916, Bishop demonstrated the traits that would later define his combat record: fearlessness bordering on recklessness and uncanny marksmanship. Flying in a lumbering reconnaissance aircraft over German lines, he engaged enemy fighters with his rear-mounted gun, driving off attackers through sheer volume of accurate fire. His pilot, a veteran named Roger Neville, reported that Bishop showed no fear whatsoever during combat, sometimes standing completely exposed in the open cockpit to get better shots at pursuing German aircraft. Yet observing was not enough. Bishop wanted to hunt, not be hunted. He wanted controls in his hands, the power to dictate combat rather than react to it. Throughout early 1916, he petitioned relentlessly for pilot training, wearing down resistance through sheer persistence. The RFC hierarchy, impressed by his combat record as an observer and desperately needing pilots to replace catastrophic losses, finally relented. In March 1916, Bishop began pilot training at Upavon, Wiltshire, despite instructors' concerns about his lack of technical aptitude. Learning to fly nearly killed him. Bishop's first solo flight ended in a crash that destroyed the aircraft and left him with minor injuries, but shaken confidence. His second solo resulted in another crash, then a third. The instructors at Upavon called him the worst pilot in the RFC, a reputation that followed him through training. He struggled with the mechanical aspects of flying, his rough landings became legendary, and his aircraft handling remained perpetually on the edge of disaster. Yet somehow, when combat scenarios began, Bishop transformed. When asked to dive on targets, engage in mock dogfights, or perform tactical maneuvers, the farm boy who could barely land an aircraft became lethal. As described in William Arthur Bishop's official RFC training records held at the Canadian Forces Archives, his instructors noted a peculiar contradiction. Bishop demonstrates poor technical flying ability but exceptional combat instincts. His gunnery is outstanding, his tactical awareness superior, and his aggression in simulated combat unmatched. Recommend advancement with reservations. In June 1916, Bishop received his pilot's wings despite the reservations, graduating into a war that was consuming pilots at a terrifying rate. The life expectancy of new pilots on the Western Front averaged 11 days. German ace pilots, men like Oswald Boelke and Max Immelmann, had developed tactical doctrines that gave them devastating advantages over inexperienced Allied pilots. They hunted in packs, used altitude and sun position strategically, and showed no mercy to novices. The RFC's policy of flying offensive patrols deep into German territory meant British pilots fought at a constant disadvantage, low on fuel and far from friendly territory. New arrivals were expected to die quickly and often, their losses accepted as the cost of maintaining pressure on German aviation. Bishop received posting to No. 60 Squadron in March 1917, assigned to fly the Nieuport 17, a nimble French-designed fighter that represented one of the Allies' best weapons against German Albatross scouts. Located near Arras in northern France, 60 Squadron had earned a reputation for aggressive tactics and high casualties. The squadron commander, Major Alan Scott, greeted the new arrivals with brutal honesty. "Gentlemen, some of you will be dead within a week. Those who survive will learn quickly or die slowly. We fly offensive patrols over German lines daily. We do not run from combat. Welcome to 60 Squadron." On his first combat patrol on March 22, 1917, Bishop encountered a formation of German Albatross fighters. What happened next would establish the pattern for his entire combat career. While his flight leader signaled a cautious withdrawal standard doctrine, when outnumbered, Bishop ignored the order and attacked. Diving from altitude with engine screaming, he closed to point-blank range on a German aircraft and fired a burst that sent it spinning down, trailing smoke. His first kill, unconfirmed but witnessed by ground troops, announced that the Canadian farm boy had arrived in the war. The mockery was about to stop. April 1917 arrived at the Western Front with a reputation that would echo through history. Bloody April, the Royal Flying Corps faced its darkest month as Germany's elite. Jagdstaffel fighter squadrons, equipped with superior Alcatraz D-3 aircraft, decimated Allied formations. The RFC lost more than 300 aircrew killed or missing during those 30 days, with entire squadrons virtually wiped out. New pilots arrived at dawn and died before sunset, their names barely recorded before being scratched from rosters. Into this maelstrom, Billy Bishop flew with a fury that astounded veterans and terrified his enemies. Bishop's second confirmed victory came on March 25 when he attacked a formation of 3 German aircraft single-handedly. His tactical approach revealed the instincts that would make him legendary, rather than the cautious, by-the-book attacks taught in training. He favored reckless aggression that caught enemies unprepared. He would dive from impossible angles, close to distances measured in yards rather than hundreds of feet, and fire devastating bursts before breaking away. His fellow pilots watched in amazement as this supposedly poor pilot transformed into a deadly predator the moment combat began. By mid-April, Bishop had accumulated 5 confirmed victories. The threshold for ace status and was quickly adding to his tally. Unlike many pilots who relied on teamwork and formation discipline, Bishop increasingly hunted alone. He would separate from his patrol, often without authorization, and prowl German airspace searching for targets. This violated every tactical doctrine, as lone aircraft were vulnerable to coordinated attacks. Yet Bishop's exceptional marksmanship and situational awareness allowed him to survive encounters that should have killed him multiple times over. His squadron commander, Major Scott, faced a dilemma. Bishop's unauthorized solo missions broke regulations and endangered squadron discipline, yet the man was racking up kills at a rate that brought desperately needed positive publicity to the RFC during Bloody April's carnage. Scott ultimately gave Bishop unofficial permission to hunt alone, reasoning that the Canadians' unique talents were wasted in formation flying. This decision, controversial among the squadron's other pilots who resented the special treatment, unleashed Bishop to fight the war his way. April 20th brought Bishop's most audacious attack yet. Flying alone over German territory near Cambrai, he spotted a German 2-seater reconnaissance aircraft. Rather than attacking from the blind spot behind and below standard doctrine, Bishop approached head-on, a maneuver considered suicidal as it exposed him to the observer's forward-firing gun. The 2 aircraft hurtled toward each other at combined speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour, both pilots firing. At the last instant, Bishop's burst struck the German pilot, killing him instantly, and the enemy aircraft plunged earthward while Bishop pulled up sharply, his neoport shuddering from the violent maneuver. Documentation from the Imperial War Museum indicates that by the end of April 1917, Bishop had claimed 22 confirmed victories in just 40 days of combat, an average of 1 kill every 2 days. This record placed him among the top Allied aces and caught the attention of senior RFC leadership. Yet even as his reputation grew, Bishop remained haunted by the faces of men he killed. Unlike the anonymous artillery barrages of trench warfare, aerial combat was intensely personal. He saw his victims' faces in the seconds before their deaths, watched them burn in flaming aircraft, saw them fall thousands of feet to their deaths. The glory that newspapers celebrated masked a darker reality that Bishop rarely discussed. His Nieuport 17, marked with distinctive squadron insignia, became a target for German pilots eager to kill the increasingly famous Canadian ace. Multiple times, Bishop returned to base with his aircraft riddled with bullet holes, shredded fabric flapping from wings, fuel lines leaking, and control cables barely intact. His mechanics marveled at his survival, patching aircraft that should have never flown again. Bishop's own explanations were typically understated. Close call today, or Jerry nearly had me. The truth was that superior marksmanship and split-second tactical decisions separated life from death in every engagement. May 1917 brought a controversial action that would earn Bishop the Victoria Cross, Britain's highest military honor, while simultaneously generating skepticism that persists to this day. In the pre-dawn darkness of June 2nd, Bishop executed a one-man raid on a German aerodrome near Cambrai. Flying alone at treetop level, he attacked the airfield just as German pilots were preparing for dawn patrols. According to Bishop's combat report, he strafed aircraft on the ground, destroyed 3 German fighters that attempted to take off, and shot down a 4th that pursued him during his escape. The raid, if accurate, represented unprecedented courage. Attacking an enemy aerodrome alone violated every tactical principle. The risks of ground fire, multiple aircraft responses, and disorientation over enemy territory made such missions effectively suicide. Yet Bishop returned to base with his aircraft damaged by ground fire and his ammunition nearly exhausted, lending credibility to his account. Witnesses on the ground reported seeing a lone aircraft attacking the German aerodrome, hearing intense machine gun fire, and seeing German aircraft crash. Major Scott endorsed Bishop's combat report without hesitation, recommending him for the highest honors. Skeptics, however, noted discrepancies. German records from the attacked aerodrome showed no losses matching Bishop's claims for that date. Some suggested he had attacked a different location or that the chaos of early morning combat led to inaccurate reporting. Others whispered that Bishop's ambition had led him to embellish or fabricate entirely. The controversy would follow Bishop throughout his life and beyond, with historians still debating the aerodrome attack's authenticity. Regardless of the truth, the Victoria Cross was gazetted on August 11, 1917, officially recognizing Bishop's most conspicuous bravery, determination, and skill. August 1917 found Billy Bishop at the height of his powers and celebrity. The farm boy mocked at Royal Military College now appeared on recruiting posters across Canada, his face staring from newspaper front pages. His exploits recounted in glowing prose that transformed brutal aerial combat into romantic adventure. The British press dubbed him the deadliest pilot in the RFC, while Canadian newspapers celebrated him as a national hero. Yet behind the propaganda and glory, Bishop fought in a war that was consuming the finest pilots of every nation with mechanical efficiency. By late summer, Bishop had transitioned from the Nieuport 17 to the newer Se-5A, a British fighter that combined speed, firepower, and structural strength superior to anything previously available. The aircraft suited Bishop's aggressive tactics perfectly, allowing him to dive faster, more battle damage, and maintain fighting capability in situations that would have destroyed earlier fighters. He customized his Se-5A with extra ammunition, modified gun sights, and stripped unnecessary equipment to improve performance. The aircraft became an extension of his will, responding to his touch with the precision he once applied to hunting rifles in Ontario woods. His daily routine during this period revealed the grinding reality behind the glamorous press accounts. Dawn patrols departed before sunrise, pilots barely awake, climbing into freezing cockpits for 2-hour missions over German lines. Combat could erupt without warning, a glint of sunlight on wings, a sudden burst of machine gun fire, the desperate, twisting dogfight where altitude, ammunition, and luck determined survival. Bishop typically flew 2 or 3 patrols daily, returning exhausted, nerves shattered, only to repeat the cycle the following day. The constant stress, the friends lost weekly, and the ever-present knowledge that every flight might be his last ground down even the strongest men. In September 1917, Bishop received a temporary posting to England for rest and to assist with training new pilots. The RFC's losses had become unsustainable, and experienced combat pilots were desperately needed to pass knowledge to replacements. Bishop found teaching frustrating. How could he explain instincts developed through hundreds of hours of combat to students who had barely soloed? He demonstrated his techniques: the vertical dive attack from altitude, the head-on pass that rattled enemies, the tight turning fight that exploited the Se-5A's superior maneuverability. Yet knowing tactics and executing them under fire with bullets tearing through fabric inches from one's head were entirely different matters. During his time in England, Bishop met Lady St. Helier at a London social function, where Canada's most famous pilot encountered British high society. The contrast was jarring. While he had spent the morning demonstrating combat maneuvers that killed men, he now attended afternoon tea where aristocrats discussed art and politics as though the Western Front existed on another planet. Bishop found these events simultaneously fascinating and repulsive. According to his later correspondence, he wrote to a fellow pilot, "They treat us like performing seals, asking for war stories between courses of their fancy dinners. They have no concept of what it really means out there." Yet Bishop understood his role in the larger war effort. Morale on the home front wavered as casualty lists grew and victory seemed no closer despite years of sacrifice. Heroes like Bishop provided tangible evidence that skill and courage could prevail, that the enemy was not invincible, that sacrifice served a purpose. He attended war bond rallies, visited munitions factories, posed for photographs with dignitaries, and delivered speeches that carefully avoided the war's true horror while emphasizing duty and determination. The propaganda value of a Victoria Cross recipient far exceeded his combat contributions, however impressive those might be. By November 1917, Bishop had returned to active duty with 60 Squadron, now flying with the rank of captain and wearing the ribbons of the Victoria Cross, Distinguished Service Order, and Military Cross on his uniform. His score of confirmed victories had reached 47, placing him among the top aces of any nation. German intelligence had circulated descriptions of his aircraft markings to their Jagdstaffel, with orders to engage Bishop whenever possible. He had become a priority target, marked for death by Germany's best pilots. The winter of 1917 brought particularly brutal conditions to the Western Front. Freezing temperatures turned cockpits into iceboxes. Oil congealed in engines, and clouds reduced visibility to near zero. Bishop flew through it all, maintaining his aggressive patrols and steadily increasing his victory tally. On January 1, 1918, he claimed his 50th confirmed kill. German Alcatraz scout destroyed during a dogfight over Arras. The milestone made international news, with headlines proclaiming Bishop hits 50 and editorials celebrating Canadian martial prowess. Yet those close to Bishop noticed changes. The perpetually confident ace showed signs of strained nervous tics, difficulty sleeping, sudden moments of absent distraction. He had been fighting continuously for nearly a year, longer than most pilots survived. The constant deaths both of enemies he killed and friends who died beside him accumulated psychological weight that no amount of courage could fully bear. His letters home, previously full of adventure and excitement, became shorter and more subdued. The war was grinding down even its greatest warriors, and Billy Bishop was not immune. March 1918 brought tremendous changes to the Western Front as Germany launched Operation Mikhaila, massive spring offensive designed to break Allied lines before American forces could arrive in decisive numbers. The German attacks gained unprecedented ground, threatening to split British and French armies and potentially win the war. The RFC flew desperate missions to blunt the offensive, losing aircraft and pilots at rates exceeding even bloody April of the previous year. Into this chaos, Bishop flew with a fury that suggested he understood his time was running out. During this period, Bishop pioneered tactics that would influence fighter aviation for decades. He advocated for small, flexible formations rather than the large, unwieldy squadrons that German fighters could exploit. He emphasized altitude advantage above all else, arguing that the pilot who controlled height controlled combat. Most controversially, he insisted that killing enemy pilots mattered more than destroying aircraft, a coldly pragmatic view that recognized trained aviators represented Germany's irreplaceable resource while machines could be manufactured indefinitely. These lessons, written in blood across the skies of France, would become doctrine for future air forces. By April 1918, Bishop's confirmed victories exceeded 60, placing him second only to British ace Edward Manock among RFC pilots. The competition for the highest score had become public knowledge, with newspapers tracking kills like sports statistics. Bishop found this distasteful. Reducing the deaths of men to numbers seemed obscene, yet he could not deny his competitive nature. Each victory brought him closer to becoming the Commonwealth's top ace, a distinction that would secure his place in history. The farm boy from Owen Sound stood on the threshold of legendary status. Research from the Canadian War Museum archives indicates that during late April and early May 1918, Bishop's tactical approach shifted notably. Rather than the wild, lone wolf hunting that characterized his earlier career, he now often flew as flight leader, directing younger pilots in coordinated attacks. His responsibilities had expanded beyond personal glory to include mentoring the next generation of fighter pilots. Many of the men he trained survived the war, their lives saved by lessons learned from watching Bishop in combat. This teaching role may have been his most significant contribution, though it garnered less publicity than his victory tally. May 31, 1918, marked Bishop's 72nd and final confirmed aerial victory. Flying an early morning patrol over the Somme sector, he engaged a formation of German Falk Scouts. The dogfight was brief and violent. Bishop destroyed 2 enemy aircraft in rapid succession before fuel limitations forced his return to base. He landed, his aircraft again riddled with bullet holes, climbed from the cockpit, and learned that he had been recalled to England. His combat tour had ended by official order, the High Command deciding that Bishop's propaganda value exceeded his combat worth. Canada's greatest ace would fight no more. The decision sparked controversy within Bishop and among his squadron mates. He had not sought relief, felt capable of continued combat, and believed abandoning his squadron during Germany's spring offensive represented a form of desertion. Yet orders were orders. On June 19, 1918, Bishop flew his final combat patrol, then departed for England. He left behind a victory tally of 72 confirmed kills, a record that would stand as the top Canadian score of the war, and a reputation that mixed adulation with suspicion, respect with resentment. The question of Bishop's actual victory count remains contentious among historians. German records do not fully corroborate many of his claimed victories, though this discrepancy exists for all pilots given the chaos of combat, poor record-keeping by retreating units, and the RFC's loose confirmation standards. Some historians suggest Bishop's actual total was lower, perhaps in the 50s, while others defend every claim. The truth likely lies somewhere between, with Bishop genuinely responsible for dozens of enemy aircraft destroyed, but perhaps not all 72 officially credited to him. What cannot be disputed is Bishop's impact on the air war and Canadian national identity. Whether he shot down 60, 70, or 80 aircraft matters less than his demonstrated courage, tactical innovation, and inspirational effect on Allied pilots and civilian populations. He proved that colonial soldiers could equal or exceed their European counterparts, that background meant nothing compared to skill and determination, and that the farm boy could become a legend. For a young nation seeking to establish its identity separate from British imperialism, Bishop provided a powerful symbol of Canadian capability and courage. His final days in combat also revealed the human cost of prolonged aerial warfare. By mid-1918, Bishop suffered from what would later be recognized as combat stress reaction or post-traumatic stress disorder. He experienced nightmares, panic attacks, and survivor's guilt over the many squadron mates who died while he lived. The ruthless killer in the cockpit was still a 24-year-old man who had witnessed and inflicted terrible violence for over a year without respite. The RFC's decision to recall him likely saved his life, not from enemy action but from the psychological breakdown that claimed many veteran pilots.